All right, so welcome back to Hacking Pro Tips. Today I have the pleasure of sitting down with a friend, Tommy DeVoss, Doggy G, who has done some awesome things, maybe some firsts on HackerOne, I would think. Your signal right now, 6.0, 22 and a half impact. The reputation coming up on 10,000, which is just awesome because it's 410 bugs found from 46 different programs. And I think this time last year, Tommy, if we were talking, you would just cracked maybe like top 100 or something like that. And now looking at the rank, you're 27th. So that's just phenomenal. But as I mentioned, maybe the first, you've had two 100K days from HackerOne, which we're going to talk about. And if I look at BugCrowd, total points all time, 619. Total rank, 219. Again, that's impressive considering all that you're doing at HackerOne and you're doing here. And what I find most interesting is you look at your chart on HackerOne for submissions, it's like 2016 a little bit, 2017 a little bit, and then boom, explodes in 2019. So, Tommy, thanks very much for taking the time to sit down to chat about hacking today. I really appreciate it.
It's no problem.
So that's it. Let's dive into the deep end here. How did you get started hacking?
IRC in the 90s. I hung out on FNet back when I first got the internet. You got a dial-up, and they gave you a little disc, and it came with MIRC and shit. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cuss.
All good, Tommy. All good.
It came with MIRC, and we just ended up, me and my little cousin, ended up on FNet, and well, I just ended up joining another hacker's room by mistake. You're able to list all of the different chat rooms that are on a given network on IRC if they're not listed as secret, and I accidentally clicked on his when I listed all the group names of the different rooms and joined it. So, yeah.
So what was that like when you just joined a random hackers chat? And I think of like the
Well, I
Sammy
didn't
Tim
know what it was.
So, okay.
I didn't know what it was at first because it was just a room with like a shitload of what looked like people, but they all had almost the exact same names. They were just like slightly different with like a hyphen or an underscore or a 1 added to it or a different number for specific letters like a 5 for S and things like that. And yeah, it just looked weird. And on IRC, you're able to look up information about each person that's connected to the network. And every single one of them were connected from a different university here in the U.S. And, well, it seemed really odd that there was somebody from just about every university in the country in this one room. Nobody was talking. So,
nobody's talking. You just joined.
It was all one person.
Oh,
it was all one person. He had egg drop bots and screened BitchX processes running on a different computer inside of just about every university in the country. It was part of his little, it's kind of a botnet, but it's not really. It's not what we think about of a botnet as today. We used our botnets back then a lot different than what they're used for today. So, but that's what it was.
So when you join this, do you like look at it? Do you talk to him? Do you what does that look like?
I tried. I said hello and just sat there and nobody said anything. And like they didn't say anything for like hours and hours and hours because come to find out the dude that owned the room was from San Jose, California.
Okay.
And well, our times were quite a bit different. Being a young ass kid on the East Coast, that was 3 hours ahead of him. I wasn't really online and when it was midnight Pacific time and stuff to be able to catch up with a person. So I would just keep joining the dude's chat room each day until I finally found him talking to a couple of other people. Like there were actually real people in there talking.
Okay.
So at first he tried to ban me. Like he banned me a bunch of times from the room.
Yeah.
But it being a dial-up, one of his friends used Mindspring. That was who my first dial-up was with. And so he couldn't ban the whole ISP because then it would ban his friend too. So he would just keep banning me specifically. So now I would just change my name or reconnect to the dial-up and get a new IP address and stuff like that. Just, yeah. I really annoyed him for a while.
And then does it get to a point where like he actually starts talking to you and allows you to stay in? or like, or
Well,
do you
not
just
him
kind of
directly.
okay?
One of his friends went by the name of Kryptonic. He was in there more often, I guess, than Lewis was, and he always saw me kept coming in there, and he would actually start replying to me sometimes. So then I would message him and annoy the shit out of him, and then eventually Lewis ended up answering questions and stuff like that for me too, and trying to explain stuff. They gave me my first shell, remote access to my first Unix computer. That I was supposed to use that for hacking because you're not supposed to hack from your own computer when you're a black hat.
Right. Yep. Okay. So yeah. So persistence pays off. You get insight. You start talking to people, and they start answering questions. And so fast forward, you said in the HackerOne interview, your first vulnerability that you ever found was a remote code execution on Yahoo. So
That was
what is that?
the first like real vulnerability on a Yahoo asset. I had one bug before that, but it was just information disclosure. The Yahoo admins were using GitHub Gist to share information back and forth, and some of them contained like passwords, SSH keys, debug information for programs that they were running inside of Yahoo with like network maps and stuff like that. That was my first bounty, but my first bug was the image tragic vulnerability in Yahoo Illuminate, their small business area.
Yep.
On their developer portal allows you to create apps and upload images for the icons and different screenshots and stuff for people to see what the app was supposed to be like, and it was vulnerable to the image magic.
Okay. So then the first vulnerability, so that image magic is going to be your first vulnerability from a ethical hacking.
Like real bug. Yeah, like real bug.
Right. Right. But the first vulnerability that you had would have been your experience working with these guys where they're teaching you, and you're not necessarily doing the ethical approach. Is that fair?
Yeah. Like I remember the first vulnerability that I really exploited a lot was remote. There was a RPC daemon that ran on Linux, like 5.2 and under for Red Hat. And back then, port 111 was the RPC port. It was open to the public on every system. And depending on what RPCs were listening there, you'd be able to root the box, depending on whether it was Linux or IRIX or SunOS or whatever. So there was one for Linux for the StatD daemon. That is the oldest one that I remember right off. And that one I used to break into a lot of Korean computers and Japanese computers with that for a long time.
And that would have been something you learned from the guys in the IRC? Like how was learning back then different from what learning is right now?
There weren't blogs of people explaining things. Like when we had exploits and stuff, they weren't like openly shared because, well, people wanted to keep them private and didn't want 0 days to be patched and stuff like that. So there were a few groups that would sometimes release their stuff for different things, but most of the time, if you wrote an exploit for something, you kept it amongst your own little group or your very close friends and didn't share the information near the way they do now.
Right. So there's obviously a big gap between you joining the IRC channel and doing some hacking and then getting into bug bounties. We're going to come back to that because it's an interesting topic and it's something that you discuss freely. And so I don't want to lose track of that. But there's also some interesting stuff that we talked about that I also want to dive into where you found image tragic on Yahoo. And that was kind of like your first vulnerability, let's say, quote unquote, because you also had the information disclosure. But in the interview, you also mentioned that you found RCEs twice in production servers in a week. So what was the other remote code execution?
It was image tragic as well. They patched it they have 2 different dev servers. One was for creating apps for one particular part of Illuminate, and another was for apps on another spot that were on separate servers. And they updated one and didn't update the other one.
So that leads me into very interesting. There's so many different ways to take this topic because um, kind of me knowing you and kind of what you do and how successful you are. You talked about like you've been hacking Yahoo for 25 years, and knowing that they use it one way on one box and one way on another box. Let's dive into that, right? Like, how do you stay on Yahoo?
I know everything is segmented when it comes to Yahoo, and it's like I know that a lot of companies like to say, "Oh, well, this is one patch that we fix in one place, and then it'll go and deploy to all servers, all production servers that use it." Blah blah blah. Well, that's not the case, at least in my experience when it comes to Yahoo. Like I've shown countless times that, well, okay, I'll report it and you can say that you're going to fix it one across all, but how come this one still works after this one over here is patched, and then this one works after you've patched those, and just showing that they're different servers and stuff.
So how do you map that out? Like, how do you know? Like how do you approach a target like Yahoo
I get SSRF and stuff a lot, so just knowing the different, I always make the servers hit my own server, so I know the IP addresses that it's using and any headers that it might be sending and stuff like that. And I mean, just using simple domain things. And I know the way AWS works really well, so when the stuff's in AWS, then, well, 9 times out of 10, if you can get it to hit for multiple different IP addresses, it's at the very least a like cluster of machines.
Right.
And if not, several machines themselves.
So the AWS, I'm curious about that. So you know how AWS works very well. At one point, you were looking at starting a company for AWS security, right?
Yeah, we actually did here in Richmond. I left the company about a year or so ago, just because I don't really like doing work for other people. Or
that's one of the beauties of bug bounty, right?
Yeah, well, I switched to bug bounties full-time in April of 2017, and then started that company on the side with a few friends, and they're all still doing this stuff. And I was one of the certified AWS partners with them with that company for here in Virginia. We had to get all types of certifications, each one of us, so that we would qualify and everything. So I don't know, I've used AWS a lot when it comes to, my normal job before I was doing the hacking was system admin. So I think that helps just because I know how the system admins think when they set up new servers or forget to take test instances down or make test instances too openly accessible because they're trying to be nice to some developer that's lazy and doesn't want to use a VPN and wants to be able to access it from home and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. That's exactly what I was alluding to. So it's awesome that you kind of dug right into it. But that skill set, like when I've had the conversation with friends and I've had the conversation with others who have, and even Ron Chan talked about like his Python development background. Here, yours is a little bit different. It's not programming background, but it's actual like systems development.
Well, I have programming as well. So it took me a long time to get an IT job, and the first company that gave me the IT job, I was their only network engineer, responsible for all of their AWS and physical servers and stuff, and I also did development for them in Java, Node, Python, and I think that's probably about it. I didn't do front-end stuff.
Do you find that helps you? Like you talked about the systems approach where, accommodating lazy developers, having that programming background in addition to the AWS, does all of that kind of provide you with insight into where to look, where to poke, and what to find?
Yes, just because knowing at least somewhat what their thought process is when they're writing it, as far as even simple things when it comes to trying to figure out parameter names and stuff like that. It's like, well, what would I have named the parameters that I wanted here? And just knowing the general naming convention for variable names in different programming languages helps you find parameters based on what architecture the site's written on and things like that.
Right. That's interesting. I think you're the first person that I've talked to that's kind of looked at it from all three angles, right? Like from the systems approach, from the infrastructure approach from AWS, and then as well as the programming. And that kind of leads into the fact that you've been doing this for like 25 years, Tommy, right? Like the hacking. This isn't, your experience is vast compared to some of the others that are doing bug bounties.
Well, there were a couple of breaks in there, so I can't say, I guess, technically 25 years straight, because they didn't let me have computers when I was in prison. So,
So let's talk about
although
that.
actually I can't say that. They did let us have them there when I was in prison the very last time, but I wasn't allowed to access them.
So let's dive into that because I really want to touch on that because you're an open book, which I really appreciate, and you're kind of, there's no topic that's off limits. So you were arrested for hacking.
Yeah, a few times.
So you had the FBI knock on your door. What was that? What was that like, that experience?
Well, the very first time, they actually waited until I left. I got in trouble with school, and as a result of what I did at the school, it caused the FBI to get involved and came and seized my computers and stuff. And as soon as I got in trouble and kicked out of school, I left Virginia and went to New Mexico for a month to stay with another hacker friend that lives there. And the day that I left to fly to New Mexico, the FBI raided my house the very first time. So I technically wasn't there the first time they raided it.
Yeah.
And then the house that I stayed in New Mexico, the day I left there and flew back to Virginia, they raided his house too. I kind of felt bad for that.
Yeah, I can see why you would feel bad. But that said, so FBI has obviously raided a couple of your locations. They raided another one while you were home. How did that
they've
experience?
gotten me when I was at home 3 times, I think. And the worst time was the very last time in 2009. So my original charges involved me and a group, and there were 13 of us total. And the only other one of us that did any prison time, he got 6 months, still apparently does things on the side for the Black Hat stuff, or at least he was 10 years ago. Well, the U.S. government, for some reason, thought I was still in contact with him when I wasn't, and thought that I was doing the stuff with him. So they kicked in my door. The day they kicked in the door, I was playing this game on my computer until 5:30 in the morning. I went to sleep at 5:30, and at 5:45 in the morning, I heard somebody screaming outside of my door, "Get out of the house! Get out of the house!" So I'm basically asleep. I walk downstairs and see people at my front door, so I go and open it, and they just rushed into my house. It was like 25 agents from the FBI, the Secret Service, DCIS, yeah, and my local county and state police.
Wow,
that one really sucked.
that kind of sounds like it, Tommy. So what is that experience like? Like they raid all of your computers, electronics, and then you go through the court system.
They took my computers. They took when they arrested me, like as an adult, the first time in 2002. They took all of my computers in June of 2002 and tried for about a year and a half to get me to turn on my co-defendants. And then when I wouldn't do that, they steadily just arrested just about every single one of them, and all of my co-defendants kept giving them information against me. So by the end of it, I was on what they call pretrial services for about a year and a half, waiting to get convicted, and ended up being sent to prison. I was only supposed to get 6 months in a shock incarceration, which is like a boot camp, and then 6 months of house arrest, but they gave me 2.5 years in prison instead.
What was that experience like, being incarcerated?
Well, it's not as bad as you see on TV. It still really sucks. Yeah. But it's not as, all I did was play softball and soccer. I gambled playing spades and poker and betting on sports, and read a lot of books. I read a novel a day.
Wow. Yeah, I forgot about that. You and I talked about that on this as a sidebar. But you were a competitive soccer player when you were growing up, right? Like you were.
Yeah, I played for a long time when I was a kid, but then I
Yeah.
messed my knees up when I was like 15, I think I was, when I had surgery on both my knees, and I still tried to play afterwards, but it kind of hurts too much to run, so I can do it for short little periods of time. Like
Yeah.
I can go and play a 30-minute game or something like. Well, right now I can't because I'm too out of shape. But I would be able to run for like a 30-minute game, but then I'd be done for probably like 4 or 5 days afterwards.
Oh shit. Um, so yeah, so on that note, like in talking about kind of like how transparent you are, you shared your story with high school students and talked about this. And so, what message did you have for them? Like, why did you talk to them? And B, what did you tell them?
Well, high school, I started high school I think in '98, and that's pretty much when I started doing most of the really stupid stuff, like breaking into military computers and stuff.
Yeah,
So I know that high schoolers are teenagers, and I know that they're curious. And when you're a teenager, at least especially in the 90s, when you're a teenager on the internet that could literally hack into anything you want just because it was so easy back then, it was like, I don't know, it was kind of cool. So, I mean, we had botnets back in the 98, 99 with thousands of computers. And, well, if you annoyed us on our IRC network, we would just DDoS your IP, and sometimes we would hit it so hard we would knock your entire city offline. Mafia Boy, the one that was arrested, the Canadian, in 2000 for the DDoS against the e-commerce sites like Amazon and stuff,
yeah.
he was on FNet. He was a member of a rival takeover group on FNet to mine. Ours was TDK, those damn kids, and he ran with a group called TNT and Glitch, and we used to battle over taking each other's IRC channels and stuff all the time. Like the DDoS net that he attacked those e-commerce sites with, he attacked us with them for like a year prior to being stupid enough to attack Amazon and shit.
Wow. Um,
It was
yeah,
a
that's
lot of
wild.
fun back then.
So I guess having that experience doing it in your years was able to kind of relate that to the high schoolers and kind of also
Well,
share what
basically to
incarceration
tell
is.
them, well, no, the biggest thing that I wanted to tell them was, with the leaks that Edward Snowden had, there's absolutely no way what you do on the internet is like secret.
Anonymous? Yeah.
The U.S. government knows what you're doing. No matter how many steps you think you're going through, you make mistakes that leave trails on who you are, and the U.S. government knows. So if they want you, they're going to get you. And there's too many companies willing to pay you to do this stuff now, and you don't risk going to prison because they don't give a shit that you're a kid when you do it. Here in the U.S., they will wait until your ass turns 18. I stopped on my 18th birthday in 2001. On November 14th, 2001, I stopped hacking for like 6 months because I was like, well, I did all my hacking as a juvenile. I'm 18 tomorrow, so they can't arrest me for stuff I did as a kid no more. Yeah, I was wrong. They waited until I was 18. They had come after me for the stuff that I did at school and other hacking things in 99 and 2000. And my parents got me a lawyer, and he was able to keep the charges from federal court and kept them in our little local county court here. And I got a really, really, really light sentence. So they were really mad that they didn't get me then. So they waited until I was 18 so I couldn't do those same little loopholes. They even tricked me. They had my probation officer because of the charges a couple years before I was on probation. They had my probation officer call me into court and release me from probation so that they could file their charges the next day. Because if they would have filed them while I was on juvenile probation, then I would have been able to fight to keep it in juvenile court until I was 21. So they got my probation to drop it when I was 18 years old so they could arrest me.
Kind of sounds like you frustrated them and pissed them off, Tommy.
Yeah, it did. It was a lot of fun.
So that said, so describing it as a lot of fun, kind of going through that, how did that experience of incarceration change you? Like, why did you go to the ethical side? Why did you turn it around?
Well, because if I get caught doing it illegally again, it's life in prison.
Hmm.
So it's not really worth the risk anymore.
That's a pretty good motivator.
Yeah. And my daughter would be really mad if I went to prison for the rest of my life. And rightfully so. I couldn't, I mean.
Well,
So,
exactly.
yeah,
Nobody wants to say that.
in 2009, every time I went to federal prison, I had the same prosecutor and the same judge. And the judge told me the last time I saw him in 2009 that if he ever sees me in his courtroom again, he will never let me go home. And I believe him, so I'm not going to test him.
That's good motivation. I like that. Because it's clearly kind of turned you
But
to
that's
the ethical
also
side.
But it also keeps me from being willing to do some of the things that a lot of people do, as far as their post-exploitation stuff and their chaining of bugs and everything like that. Like, as soon as I find something, I report it. I don't save things so that I can use them later in other bugs to make those bugs better and stuff, just because I'm not willing to risk a malicious person finding that same thing, using it, and then my IP being in the logs of doing the same thing and not reporting it, because, well, all it takes is one company to get pissed off at me and press charges, and I'm done if I can't beat them.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's an
I try to be
interesting,
nice.
and that's, I think, it's an interesting thing you touched on, which I think bears repeating, is that, like, if somebody decides to press charges, you then have to defend yourself.
Yeah.
So, like, when you're out there and you're kind of testing those gray waters and you're not too sure, if somebody decides to take that forward, like, you're on the hook, and it's not cheap, and the stakes are high if you're going to have to defend
Well, you
yourself.
can't beat it. You can't beat it. The way the U.S. computer laws are, just about every single person that uses a computer ends up violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in some way, shape, or form, whether it's violating terms of services and stuff like that for software they use, downloading things they're not supposed to download, just something. They do something to violate it. And, well, it really sucks because the U.S. government wins if it wants to.
Right. No, exactly. So that sparks something else in my mind. Other questions that kind of you and I talked about ahead of time. But you're kind of like identify and report. For you, like, looking at your stats, you've reported to like the DoD. There's Ford on there. There's other programs that don't pay, as well as very high paying programs. So why do you kind of go both lanes? Like, is it just a matter of wanting to hack whatever you can hack?
Well,
How
the
do you choose?
DoD was all of my reports, or almost all of my reports to the DoD were the first, like, 2 days that they opened their vulnerability disclosure program in, like, 2017.
Oh, okay.
And the only reason that I did it is because the military was one of the main people that got really mad at me for hacking their shit so much in the 90s and early 2000s. And now I was legally allowed to do it without getting in trouble. So I just wanted to go and see how much had changed, basically, to see if they ever got smart with security, and they didn't. I've gotten RCE
So
on some things that are running things that I
that's why I
hadn't
did.
seen since the 90s.
Yeah, I did. I think I reported one or two open to the DoD VDP program because I wanted to be able to say that I had that under my belt. That I hacked. It's the same
Yeah, and
reason
you
for
get the
why I
little
wanted to
badge
do
on
the program.
HackerOne.
Yep, exactly.
You get the little spooky badge on HackerOne for doing it. So
yeah. So let's. So yeah. So then, kind of interesting targets allow you to kind of go after things, and that's why that makes complete sense. I want to switch gears back to your success on HackerOne because you and I have talked quite a bit about it throughout your time, kind of like rising the ranks, where you shot past a lot of people, myself included. And one in particular I'm really interested in discussing is the Coinbase 10K vulnerability. Because I think you and I were talking at this time, and if correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this was your first 5K, not 5K, first 5-figure bounty. Was it not?
yeah, I got that one and one on Senec the same week, like a couple of days later. But that was just a bonus. That was the blitz added to a vulnerability on there. I got a $10,000 blitz for like a $500-600 vulnerability.
That's awesome. That's
I
amazing.
was fine with it. I was happy.
Oh, I can imagine. Okay, so but again, it almost seems like it rains money for you at certain times. So here you've got your first five-figure bounty. You get another one shortly thereafter. But let's focus on the Coinbase one. Um, you found this bug. What was it like getting the five-figure bounty at that time? Because you weren't actively looking for bugs, were you?
No, I was actually, I gamble a lot online. Whoops, one side, Jackson. I gamble a lot online, and I had gotten a bounty the previous week, a little like $175 bounty, and I was kind of annoyed at the amount that I got for the bounty for the bug. So I was just going to waste it. So I put it on this gambling website, and I turned that $175 into $130,000 in 4 days. So betting on international basketball and a little bit of NBA, not much though. So when I got paid the payout for it, I got it paid in Bitcoin and had it sent to my Coinbase account. Well, I went and my dream car was the Nissan Skyline. Yeah. And I was told about a company here in Richmond that imports them when they hit 25 years old and can get past the ban on them. So I went up there and they had one that I really wanted to get. So I started trying to transfer Bitcoin into my PayPal account so that I could buy the car. Well, when I withdrew, I think it was like $10,000 was my limit that I could do in a week withdrawals. And I did the withdrawal to my PayPal account. Well, because I'm in the U.S., any transaction that's over $4,500 will get flagged for auditing to make sure that it's not like money laundering and stuff like that. They have some stupid hold that they put on it. Most of the time it's listed within 12 hours, but it can be up to 48 hours. Mm-hmm. Well, because it was a $10,000 transfer coming in, they put that little hold on it. Well, Coinbase's API didn't understand the status code that it returned when it put that hold on it and thought that the payment failed. So they gave me my $10,000 worth of Bitcoin back, and then it was still pending, waiting to be released into my PayPal account. So I waited the 12 hours, and sure enough, it was deposited into my account, and I still had the Bitcoin. So I moved the Bitcoin out of that wallet into another wallet just to make sure that I had access to the full amount of Bitcoin again, mm-hmm. and the cash, and I did. So I went and reported it to them. And I think I would have been, after that withdrawal for the $10,000, my limit was increased to $100,000. So I would have been able to do $100,000 a week undetected without losing anything. Just basically just give myself a free $100,000 every week. That's why I was a little bit upset at only getting $10,000 bounty for it. So it's like, man, I wish I would have found that bug like 15 years ago.
So, okay.
I'd probably own an island somewhere.
This is awesome because so it's not that everyone can go out and be able to kind of withdraw $10,000 in Bitcoin from Coinbase, but I think the takeaway for other people listening to this is this was really the path that was unforeseen. So if you're looking at this and you're testing an application, it's really taking the opportunity to sit back and think about what are people not testing, and paywalls happen to be a very common one of those. So I would argue in this case, it's a $10,000 paywall. So not necessarily everybody can do it, but if you're applying it to hacking other targets, it's that taking a step back and really thinking through your target as opposed to just peppering cross-site scripting payloads in every single field that you can find. So that's really interesting. I want to take that forward and look at the next day, which I think must be some kind of record in that it's not a single payout, but it is a $100,000 day for you from
140.
140. I hate you even more. So let's talk about that. So what is that like? What is that like receiving $140,000 in a day?
Well, remember the last time I told you I had 130 grand, I went and bought a Skyline? Well, I went and bought another one, but I bought one that was much nicer. and it was the GTR instead of just the GTSC. So I bought like my real dream car.
You reminded me. I needed to throw out the disclaimer after your last story. So we're not advocating for gambling on hacking pro tips. That just happened to be how you got to where you got the 10K payout for Coinbase. I just want to make that clear. But so this time around, you get $140,000. You end up getting your dream car. Now that said, you and I were discussing. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I'm going to come back to that. But you and I were discussing the other day where I told you, Tommy, like you just made another 100K, which we'll get to. But like it's starting to make me reconsider, like, should I be doing bug bounties full time? And your response to me was very interesting, right? Like you said that you weren't sure that you liked doing bounties full time, and you were contemplating looking for a full time job.
Yeah, I like the freedom of doing bounties full time, but I'm also a really big stoner, and I lose motivation really easy to force myself to actually spend time looking for bugs, especially after big payouts. But then taking a couple of weeks off, it's like, well, I feel like I'm starting over each time as far as, okay, I've got to redo all of my Recon. I rerun my Recon almost every day anyway, but I have to start looking at things just because if it's been 2, 3, 4 weeks since I looked at anything, odds are they've probably changed code on some of the stuff that I've already looked at, so I've got to go back and look at it again. And I don't know, it's kind of, it can be annoying for a while because, well, you don't know if they've done any updates, so you spend a lot of time going back over the same assets numerous times when they haven't been changed and basically wasting time. That's why I try to find things. I look for things that are owned by Oath, well, like Verizon Digital Media, that other people hopefully haven't found yet, if that makes sense. Like specific other domains from acquisitions. I've been using things like AOL, Netscape, and CompuServe and stuff like that since the late 90s. So I know some of the old company names, so it helps to, since AOL, Verizon has acquired all of those things now, it's like, well, those are places that they own, so I know how bad their security. Some of the stuff still hasn't been updated since the late 90s and early 2000s, so it's like, the trick is to go find those things and stuff, so that way, well, they just shut it all off once you rip it apart with bugs anyway. That seems to be the best fix because the stuff's so old and not used. So I just look for things like that now just because it's sometimes you get lucky and find something that ends up being, well, 6-figure payouts. But even being able to make $10,000 or $20,000 off of it in a day's time still isn't bad.
I mean, Tommy, I can speak for myself, but I'd like to think that I can speak for a few people. If I was making 10 or 20K a day, even once a month, I would be completely happy and have no problems with that type of success.
Well, it's pretty easy. It's I think I average right now, aside from the couple of times that I've gotten the extremely large payouts, I think if I broke it down, it's like $20,000 or $30,000 a month. Since I went full-time in April of 2017. But there's also months where I didn't find shit and I didn't make shit. And then there's other months where I make over $100,000. It might not all be in one day, but over the course of the 4.5 weeks of a month, getting $20,000 here and $50,000 there and stuff, it adds up. And it helps the numbers. I've got the that Bounty Dash script that was written by, I don't even remember who now, that can take the data from some of the bug bounty sites and put it in the graph. I actually just pulled my HackerOne CSV yesterday so that I could update it just so I can see what the numbers were for last year.
Yeah, that was
last year was by far the best year. My first year in 2016, I think I only made like $20,000 across all the platforms. And then in 2017, I got just over 100. Last year, the goal was 200, and I made a lot more than that. this year I want to try and do 1 million, but the motivation's really hard. But if I can get a few more $100,000 payouts in one day, then it might make it happen.
So, so many things flew into my mind when you were talking about that there, Tommy. But let's talk about, like most recently, the $1 million challenge. And then I'm going to go back to...
Well, I'm also trying to be the third person on the HackerOne platform to reach $1 million in bounties on HackerOne.
That is insane, Tommy.
Right now, I'm at 790,000 on the HackerOne platform. So I need 210, 212, something like that. And I feel like I hopefully can do that by May.
Tom, you're the first person to sit down for Hacking Pro Tips and be able to talk about these kind of numbers. It is very humbling. So taking it back, you talked about kind of like the success, the large numbers that you can kind of pull in, how you're doing per month. The recent success is obviously with Oath kind of opening up whatever's under Verizon Media now.
Yeah.
Before that, was it as easy for you to find bugs on different programs? Like, how do you decide which programs you're going to hack on if it weren't Verizon Media?
Well, before, so I've pretty much always gone between Yahoo's program and then whoever else happens to be running at the time on either Synac or the 2-week-long Hacker Challenge programs that HackerOne does. Okay. So if every time I would get invited to one of those or a new program would launch on Synac, I would go and look at it and see if it was something that I'd want to hack on. And if it was, then I would do it. And then if it wasn't, then I would just go back to doing Yahoo. There was a few things in the Yahoo scope that I had a lot of success with. Yeah. So anytime I would find myself where I couldn't find any bugs for a while, I would go back to that little particular section, Illuminate, and I would knock out 5 or 6 bugs pretty quick within a couple of hours just to kind of, like, I guess, give myself confidence again and that I'm not sitting here wasting my time.
So many things I want to talk to you about right there. So first is, what was the barometer that you used to determine is like, do I want to hack on this target if it was something new? Like, how did you choose yes or no?
Functionality. Okay. If in the scope, the bigger the scope, the more likely I am to at least look at it. Just because I don't think that any two people do their recon and stuff the exact same or use the exact same word list and things like that when they're doing it. So the larger the scope is, I feel like I have a better chance of finding an asset that other people aren't going to find, and I don't have to worry about duplicates. Because I haven't had, when I was first starting, I used to get so mad about getting so many duplicates both on HackerOne and the Synac platform. Yeah. And then now I don't really have that problem. And do you think that's attributable to your recon process, like the word list that you're using for brute force? Well, no, just what I target. Okay. Because I'm not strictly targeting like start@yahoo.com anymore. I do on occasion still, but it's not like the only thing that I'm looking at anymore. It's like I try to look at everything that I can find that's owned by the target. And so that approach, when you say look at everything that's owned, like using like Yahoo or even like a Stardot for one of the challenges, excuse me, are you looking for their applications? Are you looking for, like, say, old boxes just in general, old servers being up? Like for me, applications, I'm looking for the more number of applications to look at. Like I don't want it to be just one single application where just this one subdomain is in scope, and when you log into the system, you can update your name on your profile and your time zone, and then everything else is static. Yeah, exactly. Like that's not something that I really care about because I don't generally look. I don't look for a lot of CSRF and things like that, unless it's like what I consider to be like critical information that is going to change. And changing your first name and your time zone on your profile for this static website, I don't really give a shit about it. So, and the $100 that I'm going to get for it is, I don't know. It's gonna bother me because that's something that they're gonna take 3, 4, 5, 6 months to fix.
Yeah.
And it's just, yeah, I'm really OCD when it comes to things like notifications and reports that I have waiting to be fixed and stuff. When I have bugs that are submitted, I'll go and check the bugs at least once every single day to see if they're still working. And a lot of times I'll comment on my tickets, hey, this is fixed, before they even ask me to verify that it's fixed.
Yeah,
just because I'm impatient.
So on that note, like if you're just looking at applications, for me, like my like the things that I tend to gravitate to are like Rails applications, because I know how Rails applications are developed. Like Shopify's a Rails shop. I was, toying with Rails development myself, and it's easy design patterns. So it's something that you're kind of, at least for me, drawn to. And I can think of what you talked about, putting myself in the developer's mindset, knowing what they screwed up. When you're going through and you're looking for, you mentioned like looking at an application, like has it changed? Ron Chan mentioned similar things, and he was doing it through JS files. And Yogurt's released tools for that as well, like to kind of track what JS files are new, what paths are being shown. Is there anything in particular that stands out to you? Like how do you quantify new functionality or changed functionality?
I try to look through JS files and stuff more. It's not something that I did for a long time until the HackerOne live hacking events. I would see other people sitting there and actually just going through and scraping all of the JS files and finding some pretty crazy stuff. So I was like, all right, maybe I should do that. So I've only started doing that within the last few months to try to help with other content discovery, like trying to look through for different paths in a JS file, so that way I know certain folders or the folder structure to try to brute force other files on.
Yeah.
But the main files that I end up looking for when I'm doing content discovery are just HTML, PHP, JS, zip files, things like save files. When you're using certain editors to edit a file on the server, while it's open, it'll save like a copy of the file under a .save with a .save extension. And sometimes if your editor crashes, that file doesn't get deleted, and you can find them sometimes like an index.php.save from where dev lost his connection or something and it crashed, and it's right there, and you can actually view the entire source of the PHP file to then hopefully find other bugs.
Oh, that's awesome. That's I don't think anybody has ever mentioned that specifically on pro tips.
There was actually, it was part of a capture the flag that I did recently too. I don't remember what the capture the flag was for, but that was, you had to find the source code for, I don't remember what type of application it was, from the .save files in the web directory.
Yeah, Vim's the same way. Like your temp files are going to be .swp, SWO, and I don't know what it is. Like SWO comes if you already have an SWP. I don't know what the third level would be if you screw that up. That's really interesting. Yeah, mine, I tend to like as I'm hacking, if it's a star dot, let's say it's a star dot target. If I find an application, I will tend to take like the main directory there and maybe give it to burp content discovery just as a quick and dirty. And then I'll also look at the patterns for the URLs and put like a placeholder for intruder around like a part of the URL. And then I'll give it a words list. And that words list usually comes from like sec lists for like large files, large names, directories, or that kind of thing. And then I'll let burp intruder
have that. I do the same, but I don't use burp. I use dir search instead of burp. The only time I really use burp is to intercept a request to use in the repeater. And I'll use the intruder sometimes, but most of the time I just use dir search. It's just easier, and I can run a lot of copies of it from my command line. Yeah, and that's the other thing is having the command line set up properly, which you shared a screenshot with me, and I never actually told you this, and I never even thought to it, but like when I'm using the command line, I like to either use like screen, or like if I'm on a machine that I can have multiple tabs, I'll have multiple tabs and I'll go back and forth. But then you had your screen split up into like 6 different splits, and like I knew about splits. Like a low number. As soon as I open up my terminal, as soon as I turn my computer on, or it reboots itself, I open up Firefox, Burp, and then a terminal in that order.
Yeah.
Just so Burp is always running to intercept every request that Firefox makes, period.
Yeah.
And my terminal, as soon as I open it up, I split it into 4 different panes. So that way, my top left one is the one that I always, 9 times out of 10, I'll use that one for different VPN connections that I'll end up having to make. Like if I'm going to be on Synac, got to open up the VPN connection. I just run it in that top pane, or my HackerOne VPN, or just hide my ass VPN because I need to be from a different country or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the other ones I'll have different depending on what target I'm looking at. Like if I'm looking for new targets on Oath, I'll have 4 or 5 panes that are just running Aquatone on different domains that I've found that are owned by Oath, just to see if I can find any subdomains for them.
Yeah.
And the ones that I find at least 25 or more subdomains, I'll actually run through with port scanning them and then screenshotting any web servers and stuff that they run to see if it's something that I want to look at.
Yeah. That makes complete sense. I don't do as much screenshotting as I should. A lot of that stuff for me is still manual. So I'll tend to log into a VPS box, and then I'll enumerate subdomains just like you, and then pass them off to GoWitness. And then once GoWitness sets up a directory, generates its report, I'll open up a small server so I can go and I can look at that because it creates an HTML file for report.html.
I don't even get that. my screenshot tool is something that me and my friend wrote, written in Node. All it does is take a list of URLs and loads the page and takes a screenshot and saves it into a directory, the screenshot. So then I have to go and look at every single one of the images.
Click each one.
But I also, every single image I have to go look at one at a time. Like in the GIMP viewer on Linux because I use Fedora.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a pain in the ass sometimes when you get things with Yahoo and you've got 5,000 screenshots that you got to sift through. But I also I found over the course of the last year, I've come across different things like debug flags and stuff like that happen to work on various different assets and stuff like that. So I've made it so my screenshot tool now adds 11 different debug flags that I found on various things to as a get parameter in every single screenshot that it takes, just in case it happens to work on some website that I end up screenshotting in the future and giving me debug information or admin portals and stuff like that.
Oh, shit. And have you found that to be very successful? I mean, it's not a lot of work. It's just something you can add on.
It's something that I just changed one line. I use Parameth to help find parameters and stuff on files that I find with DirSearch. And anytime it finds a particularly cool debug flag or something, then I'll add it to the list just in case it finds it somewhere else. And I mean, it's worked pretty good when I find a debug flag that Yahoo or AOL or something uses. I'll run it across every one of their websites that I can possibly find, and generally will end up with anything from 5 hits up to 10 or 15.
Man, that's awesome. That's savage. Again, that's a pro tip straight from, I'm going to say Tommy. Some people would call Patrick Fehrenbach Patrick 5K. I was going to say Tommy 10K, but that also doesn't seem fitting. So Tommy 100K is what I think I would go with. So that's a pro tip from Tommy 100K that we haven't had on pro tips before. So I love that. Tommy, I feel like you and I could talk about this for hours. We're coming up on the full hour right now, and unfortunately I did not book extra time in my meeting room, so I'm sure I'm going to get cooked out. So I wanted to make sure that we got to a piece of advice that or rather something that you said in the HackerOne interview, and that was things are constantly changing, right? So it's kind of impossible to stay current. I'm curious, as you learn all of this stuff, and you've mentioned it yourself, you're a massive stoner, Those are your words, not mine. How do you keep it all straight in your
Yeah.
head? Like, how do you go out and learn all this stuff, and then when you're hacking, think, oh yeah, there's this way you can apply, go after that application. There's this way to go after that application. Or does it matter? Are you just looking for general patterns to attack an application?
It's the only stuff. It's the only stuff that I can remember. Like
Yeah.
I'm really, really, really bad ADHD, and the way my mind works, if I don't care about it or I have no interest in it, I'm not going to remember it. I like people in my personal life get pissed at me all the time because I don't remember shit. And it's like, I don't mean to. It's just the way my head works. If it's not computers or computer related, I don't remember it.
Yeah.
So basically all I do now is I read every single blog post that I can that comes across Twitter or in the blogs channel on Bug Bounty Forum just to see what other people are finding and stuff like that. And I read like a bunch of different exploits that come out on packetstormsecurity.com.
Okay.
They have different exploits for all types of things, and even if I don't understand exactly what the exploit's doing for a particular thing, I'll still look through it just to try to get an understanding of like how it might be working, just to, well, hopefully be able to use something similar at a later time.
Yeah.
It's like the day that I got the 140,000 from Oath, that was because I ended up beating the block. They used the blacklist. I had a bunch of SSRFs across a couple of their assets, and they used a blacklist to prevent access to specific internal servers and the AWS metadata server after we'd already compromised the information and stuff. Their fix was to explicitly block them. Well, was able to beat it with I read some blog post. I don't even remember what it was for, but it mentioned octal encoding an IP address.
Right.
So I had never used that type of encoding when I was doing SSRF before. I'd used like several other different encodings for IPs to beat a block list, but I'd never even heard of octal encoding. So then I went and I octal encoded the AWS metadata IP, and it failed. So then I tried it just with the very first octet of the IP address. I converted just that to the octal encoding, and it actually worked and gave me their AWS keys again. So I beat it across like everywhere they used that same blacklist. So yeah, that was something that I learned in some blog post, and it just happened to be. I just happened to remember it at the right time.
Well, perfect time to remember, Tommy, when you were
Yeah.
140K. That's awesome. Because for me, it like the takeaway that I take from that is kind of what you spoke about earlier, is that you're not going after any and every vulnerability, right? Like you're looking for specific types of things. So you're kind of ignoring the CSRF. In this situation, you were looking for SSRF. But then this also kind of goes to what I'm feeling at certain times is like just burnout, right? Like you have to be everything everywhere. But here it's, Oath and Verizon Media now, and you're able to kind of retain the types of bugs that you care about that are interesting to you, which I would argue keeps you motivated in working in bug bounties.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because I've had success in certain places on Oath. I know how their developers are thinking and stuff a bit better. So it helps to find the files and stuff like that on other servers, since I've already found them on previous servers or something similar.
Yeah. Well, Tommy,
and anytime I find really interesting files, I'll add that file to my little list of files that I use in Dir Search. Or if I read a blog post and it has a specific path for a known vulnerable file or something, I'll add that just in case it ends up finding it at some point on some random server.
Oh, that's super smart. I keep meaning to do that and think about, like, I've been trying to automate my Recon at least. So like create like a small Rails app that, I do my brute forcing and everything in there. I haven't gotten to brute forcing yet, but if I can do that and identify like files that it's found, my thinking was at least for subdomains to start, and then generate the list off of that, right? So like each time you find one, you can just increase a counter and then keep track of how many times you find it, and then you can prioritize that list. But it sounds like you're doing the same thing, generating your own list, and then just handing it off to Dir Search. allows you to kind of look for interesting applications and whatnot. I'm going to have to implement that as well. So hopefully listeners do too. Before we sign off, Tommy, the last thing I wanted to ask you, and I had so many other questions, so I really want to say thank you for the hour that you've given us. But do you have any advice for people that are new getting into bug bounties?
Well, for one, I personally wouldn't waste the time on free programs. The motivation behind working on a free program and working on a paid program isn't quite the same. And you don't necessarily need those free programs to get your private invites to different places on the different platforms. There's plenty of public programs that actually pay and care about a researcher's time. Like Oath has got a public program, and it's a huge scope. So, I mean, if you really want something with a really big scope to start learning on, I'll go look at them. There's plenty of stuff out there. And don't shy away from a program just because it's been running for a long time. Because, I mean, just because it's been running for 4 or 5 years and might have thousands of bugs submitted, nobody that's looked at that program is going to look at it in the exact same way that you are. So you never know what you're going to find that thousands of other people have overlooked.
And code changes all the time, just like you mentioned. People ship things constantly. And I can speak to it here at Shopify. Like, our code is constantly changing. It's just a matter of figuring out kind of what's changed. And we happen to have changelog.shopify.com. But other applications have different things for people to look at. So I would echo that. That's great advice. Well, Tommy 100K, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to walk through all of this. As always, I can't emphasize this enough. You are an open book, and when I was getting started in bug bounties, I had a little bit of taste of success. But when I reached out to you and started chatting, I think you immediately just flooded me with information and answered any questions that I had, and I really appreciated that. So I can't thank you enough for that, and then also for this. It really means a lot for you to sit down, take time out of what is a full-time job doing bug bounties, and sit down and answer some questions. So thank you very much on behalf of everyone that's listening to this.
It's no problem. It was fun. Now I got to decide if I want to hack something or take a nap. That's one of my hardest decisions to make every single day, and the nap wins more often than not.
I want those problems, Tommy. I want that to be my problem. Nap or hack. All right. Thanks very much, Tommy.